Welcome to Multi-Tiered System of Supports 101. The goal of this webinar is to outline the core components that make up a multi-tiered system of supports. A few things before we begin. To start, Patton's mission. The mission of the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Education and to build the capacity of local educational agencies to serve students who receive special education services. Also, PDE's commitment to least restrictive environment. Our goal for each child is to ensure individualized education program teams begin with the general education setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment. The objective of this webinar is to build an understanding of the conceptual underpinnings and key components of a multi-tiered system of supports, which I will refer to as MTSS for the remainder of the webinar. Our discussion today will be very broad with the goal of providing a basic overview of these systems and illustrating some key points as opposed to providing a prescriptive process for implementation. However, we will be providing a list of resources for further professional development and technical assistance around MTSS. To conclude the webinar, we will introduce you to a fidelity tool that can be used to assess your current level of implementation and help you to action plan for designing an MTSS for behavior. To accompany the webinar, we have created a document that contains links to videos, publications, and websites relating to the concepts discussed throughout the webinar. This is to provide you to access to more detailed resources and technical assistance around these topics for further information, professional development, and implementation efforts. You will find the Multi-Tiered System of Supports 101 resource document within the course materials on Schoology, with the additional references arranged slide by slide for your convenience. A list of all definitions used for this webinar, including other AEDY specific definitions, can be found in Section 2 of the Settlement Agreement between the United States and the Pennsylvania Department of Education. You may visit the Multi-Tiered System of Supports 101 resource document for a link to the settlement agreement between the United States and the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Also, on December 10th, 2015, President Barack Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act, also referred to as ESSA. ESSA replaced No Child Left Behind as the nation's main education law. Pennsylvania commits to enhancing its statewide system of supports by developing a more robust focus on essential conditions observed in schools. Specifically, Pennsylvania will ensure student-specific academic, social, emotional, and behavioral supports to all students by implementing a multi-tiered system of supports. MTSS refers to a multi-component, comprehensive, and cohesive school-wide and classroom-based positive support system through which students at risk for academic and behavioral difficulties are identified and provided with evidence-based and data-informed instruction, support, and intervention. Although the main focus of today is on MTSS for behavior, we do want to highlight that MTSS can be implemented for academics as well, and as an integrated system where the structures of MTSS exist and are used to support both the learning and social emotional needs of all students. Regardless of whether you are choosing to target behavior, academics, or both, an MTSS contains the same key components and processes. These components, which we will cover in more depth throughout the presentation, include instruction and interventions delivered through multiple tiers that increase in instructional and intervention intensity and measurement precision as student need increases. Overall goals and objectives based on educational, family, and community system priorities that are rooted in federal, state, and local standards for academics, behavior, and emotional regulation. Periodic universal screening of all students to evaluate the effectiveness of universal supports for students at risk for academic and behavioral difficulties. The use of screening and assessment data to identify student academic, behavior, and emotional regulation needs. The gap between desired and current levels of performance will be the focus of intervention. The selection and implementation of evidence-based interventions that match the identified needs of the student or students. frequent progress monitoring with validated measures compared to goals and benchmarks. And finally, the use of data to inform practices and educational decision-making at the universal, targeted, and individual student level. All of these features are used together by teams comprised of diverse educational professionals, as well as appropriate community and family stakeholders, to evaluate the effectiveness of educational programming at helping all students achieve organizational, family, and community goals, and to support students who are not showing desired levels of performance at achieving these outcomes. This graphic helps to illustrate Pennsylvania's MTSS model, as well as the problem-solving foundations that MTSS frameworks are based on. In a problem-solving model, data are used to define student problems in measurable terms related to expected academic and social outcomes. A team of educators and other appropriate stakeholders then analyzes the problem to identify evidence-based solutions, as well as to set goals to minimize the performance gap between current and expected levels of performance. Once a plan is developed, the team continues to collect data so that the effectiveness of the previously generated solutions can be evaluated. In the final stage of the process, the team evaluates whether their efforts have been effective at reducing or eliminating the problem, as well as planning for future needs. It is important to note that this problem can be applied to multiple levels of an organization, including universal practices for all students, targeted practices needed by some students, and the more individualized needs of a few students. For example, a school may engage in the problem-solving process for an entire building, a grade, a classroom, or an individual student using data from office discipline referrals to identify specific patterns of problems and needs, to generate hypotheses as to the cause of these problems, and to monitor the effectiveness of selected strategies designed to reduce the problem. The first key feature of an MTSS is a system of instruction and interventions that are delivered through multiple tiers. The intensity of instruction and intervention increases as student need increase and they progress through the tiered system of support. Typically, a three-tiered model is used, with Tier 1 representing universal practices designed to benefit all students, Tier 2 representing supports for a targeted group of students who do not respond adequately to Tier 1 supports, and Tier 3 representing the most intensive and individualized supports available in your setting for students who demonstrate the highest level of need. Of particular importance to note in regards to implementation in AEDY settings is that the tiers denote a level of support and intensity related to student need, not a particular intervention itself. Many practices that may be reserved for Tier 3 supports in a traditional school may be appropriate as Tier 1 supports in such settings, and then intensified and individualized as students progress through the advanced tiers. This graphic illustrates the idea of a continuum of school-wide instruction and interventions aimed at supporting all students. Tier 1, or primary prevention, includes universal supports designed to benefit all students and should ideally meet the needs of approximately 80% of the student body. Secondary prevention, or Tier 2 supports, are designed for approximately 15% of the student body who do not respond adequately to universal supports. The approximately 5% of students with the most intensive needs receive tertiary individualized support at Tier 3. The continuum of instruction and intervention should be designed to support students in achieving overall goals and objectives that are based on educational, family, and community system priorities, and that are rooted in federal, state, and local standards for academics, behavior, and emotional regulation. In order to identify students at risk for not meeting program goals and objectives, periodic universal screening is required to identify students who are meeting expectations and those at risk for moderate and significant difficulty in meeting or making appropriate progress towards federal, state, and local standards. At the secondary level, one such screening method is the use of an early warning system. Research shows that attendance, behavior referrals, and course performance significantly predict students who are at risk for dropout. Problems in even just one area can place a student off track for graduation, with students who have problems in multiple domains demonstrating higher levels of risk. Other sources of universal screening data may include behavior screening data and MTSS data. One thing to note here is that decisions made when interpreting screening data in an AEDY setting may need to be adjusted based on the high level of risk that most students attending these programs are likely to demonstrate. The key is to define what is off track for your setting so that resources can be appropriately allocated to those students not making progress in relation to the local supports and standards. Once screenings are conducted, screening data are then used to identify student needs. The gap between desired level of performance and current level of performance will be the focus of the intervention and used to determine the level of support a student may benefit from, such as Tier 2 or Tier 3 support. A team of educational professionals should collect and analyze screening data at designated intervals to identify students in need of secondary and tertiary supports, as well as to evaluate how effective primary prevention and universal supports are at meeting the needs of the majority of students. If the number of students identified for needing advanced tier supports exceeds approximately 20%, it may be advisable to engage in problem solving and interventions at the universal level, as it may not be feasible to effectively address the needs of more than 20% of students through the advanced tiers. In order to select appropriate interventions, a team of educational professionals should examine existing data and determine if additional data are needed to accurately define the problem and develop appropriate hypotheses as to the cause of the problem. Other sources of data that may be needed could include observations, interviews, behavior rating scales, and functional behavior assessment. Once appropriate interventions are selected, it is important to set a goal and monitor the organization, group, or individual students' progress towards these goals. In order to do this, progress monitoring is essential. Teams should set ambitious but attainable goals based on data for universal, targeted, and individual student needs, and continue to collect data that can be used to evaluate the effectiveness of instruction and intervention at all tiers. The frequency of collecting progress monitoring data should increase with student need and movement across the tiers. At Tier 1, screening data and annual outcome measures may be sufficient to evaluate the effectiveness of these supports. At the advanced tiers, consider collecting data daily, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, depending on the intervention and the type of data being collected. Some potential sources of progress monitoring data could be office discipline referrals, direct behavior ratings, daily behavior report cards, behavior rating scales, attendance, and other valid sources of formative and summative assessment. Data that are collected through progress monitoring are then used to evaluate the effectiveness of instruction and intervention efforts at all tiers. Progress monitoring data should be reviewed by a team of educational professionals at regularly scheduled intervals and compared to organization goals and/or individual student goals. The frequency with which interventions are reviewed, again, varies by the tier of concern. Universal practices may be reviewed and evaluated several times per year. Group student interventions may be evaluated monthly. Individual student data could be reviewed as often as weekly. Goals and interventions can be adjusted based on this data. Students who show success may need to have goals adjusted to reflect higher levels of performance and proficiency, or may benefit from having support stated. Students who do not show improvement may need interventions adjusted to provide more intensive support. Universal practices that do not seem to be working may need to be intensified or replaced with more robust practices. MTSS is a framework, and it is adaptable to a variety of contexts with no one right way to implement. When implementing an MTSS in an AEDY setting, there are many factors that may need to be considered to make a contextual fit with your local education agency. Some things to consider may be the intensity of universal practices and the types and frequency of data collected at all tiers. These features and others may look very different in an AEDY setting as compared to a traditional school. In order to help you troubleshoot this process, there is a network of technical assistance available in the state of Pennsylvania. This network is the Pennsylvania Positive Behavior Support Network. Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, or PBIS, is a research-validated MTSS framework for behavior. Within Pennsylvania's network, there is a group of facilitators that can provide technical assistance to your LEA in implementing PBIS. Links to more information on the PA-PBS network and PBIS in general are at the bottom of the Multi-Tiered System of Supports 101 resource document. A fidelity tool can be a valuable resource to action plan and evaluate efforts around MTSS implementation. The Tiered Fidelity Inventory is a research-validated tool used by the PA-PBS network to guide PBIS implementation and assess for fidelity of implementation. For the remainder of the webinar, we're going to orient you to this tool to help you understand some critical features of PBIS. It is important to connect with someone who serves as an external coach, such as a PA-PBS network facilitator, to assist your team if you want to complete the TFI and implement PBIS. The primary purpose of the slide is to help school teams improve their PBIS implementation efforts. The primary audience for the TFI is core teams, faculty, families, and school administrators. Effective use of the instrument involves multiple administrations with action planning and goal setting following each administration. The TFI can be used in multiple ways. It can be used as a needs assessment to develop action plans and can be used to progress monitor implementation of PBIS. It should be administered at least annually to track implementation growth, and it can also be used to receive state recognition for PBIS implementation with fidelity. At Tier 1, the TFI assesses three main areas of implementation: teams, implementation, and evaluation. The teams scale assesses for the presence of a Tier 1 problem-solving team comprised of the appropriate individuals that meets designated intervals to design, implement, and monitor universal practices related to PBIS. The implementation scale assesses for key features of effective Tier 1 practices. The evaluation scale assesses for the use of data to identify, analyze, intervene, and evaluate the effectiveness of Tier 1 problem-solving and implementation efforts. Similarly, at Tier 2, the TFI also assesses for implementation in three main areas: teams, interventions, and evaluation. Again, a team of professionals with various backgrounds and established operating procedures that responds to students with targeted needs is a core feature of Tier 2. Additional core features include having a variety of intervention options that can be matched to student needs, as well as the use of data to evaluate the effectiveness of such interventions, and again, evaluate team functioning and performance annually. At Tier 3, the TFI assesses for implementation in the areas of teams, interventions, support plans, and evaluation. Similar to Tier 2, a team process for matching appropriately intense intervention to students' needs, as well as additional processes to identify specific individual factors that contribute to understanding and intervening for students with the most intense needs, is a core feature. Functional behavior assessment and consideration of academic and quality of life factors is also an important feature at this level. Additionally, having established procedures for evaluating the effectiveness of Tier 3 supports and operating procedures is essential for fidelity of implementation. That concludes our webinar. We'd like to thank you for your time today and hope you found this information useful. If you have any questions, feel free to select the email icon on this slide. You will then be directed to a Google form that will allow you to submit questions directly to a consultant within the Behavior Initiative. Thank you.